CSS uses something called the box model. And what the box model says is that every element in our web page is structured in the shape of a box. And here's what I mean. Every element has content, and every element has padding surrounding that content between the content and the border of the content. And finally, every element has margin between itself and other elements on our web page. So the box model is made up of 4 parts. At the center we have content, surrounding the content is padding, then we have our border, and then we have the space between elements called margin. To demonstrate how to change the style of each of the features of the box, I've set up 2 buttons in my HTML, button 1 and button 2. Let's begin by styling the content of our button elements, that is, the innermost part of our box model. And we'll do that by going to our style.css file. You can see it's empty from the previous examples that we had. And we want to select the button element. That's the element that we're looking to style. And the 2 properties that we want to change the values of are both the width and height properties. You can see here that I changed each of them to be 50%, meaning 50% of their parent element, in this case 50% of the body element, but you can change them to whatever values you prefer. And if we reload the web page, we can see that our default button styling changes such that each of our buttons takes up both 50% of the width and 50% of the height of our web page. Now let's change the next innermost property of our box model, the padding property. And we'll do this by replacing our width and height rules with padding rules. And we'll notice a couple things. First, we'll notice that we have 4 rules that each list out the individual aspects of our padding, the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. And these are the respective paddings relative to our content. The next thing is that we'll notice that instead of providing values as percentages of our web application's viewport, we provide them as pixel amounts. And there's no right or wrong way to do this necessarily. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your styling rules. Having 4 individual rules just to style our padding is a little bit bulky, and we can reduce this down to a single rule like this. Here, we'll still list each of the 4 sides of our padding, but instead of listing them out as individual rules, we just have them in a space-separated list, where we start with the top padding, then the right padding, then the bottom padding, then the left padding. And since the opposite paddings are the same value, meaning the top padding and the bottom padding as well as the left padding and the right padding are the same value, we can actually reduce it down to 2 values that indicate the top and bottom padding and the left and right padding. Furthermore, since the top and bottom padding and left and right padding are the same, we can actually reduce it down to a single value that indicates this is the pattern we want for all 4 sides. And let's refresh this in our browser to see what the effect is. And now we can see that the padding on all 4 sides is 25 pixels for both buttons. We're actually going to wait to discuss how to style borders until we discuss how to style buttons properly. So for now, we're going to skip on to how to style margin. And styling margin is the exact same in terms of the techniques we can use in our CSS that we use to style padding. So we'll refrain from the details and just get straight to the end game, which is to add a bit of margin the same way that we did padding to our buttons. And refreshing our web page, we can see the effect that adding margin has to our buttons. And we note that whereas padding creates space within our element, margin creates space between our elements. The last thing we want to cover in this section is developer tools that are available for us to examine box models of elements in our page. So to do that, go ahead and right-click on an element, in this case one of our buttons, and when our developer tools open up, we'll be able to see in our styles section the actual box values of that element. And so we can see that the width is 49 pixels, the height is 15 pixels, the padding is 50 on each side as we'd expect, the border is the default border that HTML has, and the margin is also 50 on each side, and it highlights as we hover over each one of these aspects of the box model.